the United States has a new president. I think so. Right? Okay. Well, let's assume the United States has a new president, Joe Biden. What does it mean for Amazon sellers? In this video today, I'm going to break down everything you need to know on the implications of the 2020 US presidential election. Giddy up. Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to the 2020 USA election special. My name is Adam. This channel is Heist, that is all things Amazon FBA. And in particular, today we're going to dive into the implications of the recent presidential election in the US and what it means for us as Amazon sellers. First, real quick, we've had a flood of new subscribers here over the last week to the channel. So I want to say hello, welcome, thank you. My goal with this channel is to document and share my thoughts as I grow 7- and 8-figure Amazon brands, and hopefully distill my learnings on my audience, that we can grow together, that we have an engaged community. So thank you for being here. I hope you're here for the long haul. So it's been a crazy couple months. Frankly, it's been a crazy 4 years. Very divisive, very interesting, very dynamic in the landscapes of politics within the US, even if you don't live here. If you're an Amazon seller, it's been particularly interesting with international trade with China specifically on how we navigate our businesses in the new US dynamics. And things are going to change. There's going to be new rules, new mentalities, new strategies as Joe Biden enters the mix as a president in 2021 and beyond. In the video today, we're going to break it all down. Disclaimer. These are my own thoughts, ideas, based on the information that I've triangulated here over the last little bit, trying to figure out and think myself on the implications for my businesses with this election. I might not be right. I'm not an expert on it, and I'm certainly not authorized. So legal disclaimer, don't hold me accountable for any of this stuff because I'm just a layman like anybody else. I would also just say, I don't care who you voted for, who you wanted to win, whether you think Joe Biden should have won, whether you think it was a fraud, whether you think Trump's an idiot. That's not what this is about. This is about documenting some strategies that we can understand and some implications that we can understand to make our businesses better. So let's dive into it. So the first and probably most profound impact of the 2020 presidential election is going to revolve around tariffs and how they impact Amazon sellers. If you've been in this game at some point over the last couple of years, you've likely been hit with between 8 and 25% additional tariffs on your goods if they originate from China. It's a kick to the you-know-what when this went down. It added cost to all of us as sellers. And if you didn't increase your end price on Amazon, you took a major profitability hit. So that's probably the biggest question coming into this. What is Joe Biden going to do with the Trump tariffs as they relate to China? Trump made extensive use of Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. What this enabled him to do is to target particular countries and categories of products and impose tariffs paid for by the US importer or the entity that imported it, ultimately to penalize China for international trade infractions that he perceived. The Trump administration has also applied 70 executive orders, presidential memoranda, notices of intent, proclamations, and determinations to apply to trade policy. So what is Joe Biden going to do? The good news is, back in August, he gave an interview with Yahoo to give his thoughts. Let's cut to the video.
President Trump is not the first president to say China is ripping off the United States. President Obama made similar complaints. Some have said Trump's stance is a good one to counter China's influence. Would you keep the tariffs?
No. Hey, look, who said Trump's idea is a good one? Who said Trump's idea is a good one?
Some feel that.
Some 2 or 3 people. Manufacturing has gone in recession. Agriculture lost billions of dollars that taxpayers had to pay. We're going after China in the wrong way. China is stealing intellectual property. China is conditioning being able to do business in China and based on whether or not you have 51% Chinese ownership. That's got to end. I've spent a fair amount of time when I was vice president with President Xi because the president wanted me to get to know him. He's no Democrat with a small d at all. But here's the deal. I made it real clear.
So if you scrap those tariffs, what do you want in return? Or are you just going to scrap them without any concessions?
No, here's the deal. The question is, what is the appropriate behavior that they have to engage in international trade with us? And they have to play by the international rules. And what we have done is we have disarmed ourselves. We make up 25% of the world's economy, but we poked our finger in the eye of all of our allies out there. The way China will respond is when we gather the rest of the world that in fact believes in open trade and making sure that we're in a position that the world that we deal with WHO the right way. That in fact that's when things begin to change. That's when China's behavior is going to change.
So what does this all mean? I think the good news is, worst case, it's not going to get worse than it is now. I anticipate that if Trump would have been reelected, given that the coronavirus originated in China, it had a major impact on public perception and the effectiveness of his administration and the economy of the US, I think he would have gone after China very hard in the form of additional tariffs in addition to what he's already imposed. So I don't think it's going to get worse. I don't think Joe Biden's going to pile on top and make it worse, at least as it relates to imports from China for US-based companies. I also think that at some point they're going to get rolled back. Two questions I have are, how is he going to navigate that, and when is it going to happen? He probably wants to implement it, but he needs to get something from China in the form of concessions or adjustments to how they conduct themselves with international trade and with the US. He's not just going to go down there and remove it, because he's going to get skewered politically if he does that. He also needs to have some tangible thing, I think, to sell it to his own party, to the Senate, and to Congress to make it happen, despite the fact that he could still use an executive order and doesn't necessarily need those groups to implement it. When is this going to happen is probably the other question. I don't think it's going to be short term. I don't anticipate that as he enters the new administration next year, that he's going to implement it in this first year. I just think there's other high priority things going on. Coronavirus is a major thing that he needs to tackle, in addition to some other elements of his agenda. So I don't think it's going to happen in the first year. I also highly doubt he would do it in the last year, because you're running into a new presidential re-election at that point. He doesn't want to have this flying thing in the airwaves of him being in cahoots with China. So I anticipate it will happen either 2022 or 2023. The other caveat as it relates to tariffs. There's 70 days left at the recording of this video in Trump's current administration. He could use executive actions. He could take retaliatory actions against China in these last 70 days. I hope that doesn't happen. It's unlikely he'll be able to pull it off. However, just be aware that that's a distinct possibility. So that's tariffs. The second biggest implication of a Biden administration, especially if you've got a US-based LLC, and certainly if you file your taxes in the US, is going to be related to both corporate and personal taxes. This is definitely true if you make personal or business earnings greater than $400,000 per year. So here's a quick look at the current Trump tax structure, which was actually a key part of his tax agenda a couple years ago, where he brought down corporate and high earning taxes in the United States. So let's use this fictitious example. You're doing pretty good on Amazon. You're pulling down $5 million in revenue per year. Your gross margins are 25%. So you pull down $1.25 million. And then your net earnings after all of your expenses and all the things that go into running a business are 15%. So you basically net $750,000 US per year. In the Trump administration and current tax structure, the corporate tax rate is 21%. So on all of those earnings, so in this example, you would pay taxes of $157,000 roughly. So you'd net out after taxes about $592,000 in a Trump tax situation. Now let's look at Biden's plan. The first big change is going to be the corporate tax rate. He's signaled in his plan that he wants to roll back to the previous pre-Trump tax rate of 28% on corporate taxes. So in this scenario, you bring home earnings of $540,000, which is $52,000 roughly more taxation than you'd have on your business under the Trump administration. Now, let's say you pull this money out of your business and that you'd use that as personal income. In Biden's plan, there's a bunch of details. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a CPA. I haven't gone through all the tax law. This may be an imperfect explanation, but after you make over $400,000, that additional amount above $400,000 that you bring home is going to have some additional tax implications under the Biden plan. One is if you're taking that through an employer, half of half of the additional tax your employers are going to take, half you're going to take, and that's 12.5%. There may be some ways around that as an entrepreneur and LLC owner. But what you absolutely can't avoid is that they're rolling back the tax reductions that Trump implemented, especially for high net worth individuals. So every dollar above $400,000 that you take home from your Amazon business is going to incur an additional 2.6% tax. So in this example, if you brought home that $540,000 after tax on your business and put it into your personal earnings, there'd be $140,000 of that every dollar above $400,000 that's going to see that additional 2.6% tax. So in this example, it's an additional $3,600. So between those two things, if you kind of look at the tax implications for the business as well as for the individual in this very basic example, it's $56,000 more than you'd see in the Trump administration. Big caveat here: to control your agenda as a president and to implement things, you get your budget approved through Congress, but all of those things to get written into law require the Senate. So can Joe Biden, if he doesn't have the Senate, get this implemented? To be determined. It may be a long slog for him, but if it does get implemented, these are definitely going to be what you would see in an example like this. One other quick nugget, which is a bonus: if you decide to retool or stand up manufacturing or bring manufacturing back to the US, you would get a 10% tax incentive under the Joe Biden tax plan. So if you've got a product where it can conceivably be brought and manufactured to the US, you could stand up some operations, you could hire some people, you would have a 10% tax benefit. I should also note that if and when Joe Biden implements some of those tariff improvements that we hope to see, obviously these things on our gross margin up here in both of these cases will be escalated between 8 and 25% depending on the product. So even if this tax plan goes through, if he also rolls back some of those tariff things, we might see kind of a net, like, very minimal impact. The final thing I will say about taxes, there's some things on estate earnings, and when you pull out more than $1 million from the sale of a business, that's embedded in this tax plan, where it's going to be less advantageous to sell a business greater than $1 million once this gets implemented. So if you've got plans to sell your Amazon business over the next couple years, I would advance that plan and try to do it over the next year before this tax plan gets implemented, and while he kind of goes back and forth to get it passed through the Senate. So if you're in the market to sell your business, you could probably pocket a little bit more of those earnings, incur less taxation, especially if you're selling it for more than $1 million, if you do so over the next 6 to 12 months. That's taxes. The next question is related to business relief related to COVID and its impacts. I would anticipate that there will be a new plan rolled out to provide additional EIDL loans or PPP loans to businesses to help them deal with the negative economic consequences that have stemmed from the COVID impact in the US. Don't know exactly what these are going to be, how they would be structured, but I would anticipate that that would happen probably honestly within the first month or two of the new presidency. That brings me to a related point, which is, what is Joe Biden going to do on COVID? Well, I think that it's not going to be a secret that there's going to be an additional relief package rolled out. Whether or not the Trump administration does that in the next 70 days is to be determined. I think it's unlikely. I think that they want to pass the buck to the Democrats and see them impose the debt. So I doubt that they're going to pass something, although it's possible the Senate squeezes something out before January 20th. But assuming they don't, I think that's going to be one of the first things on Joe Biden's agenda within the first month or two is to pass a new relief package for individuals. And I think like we saw in March and April of this year, 2020, I think we can anticipate a spike in sales when that happens. If citizens throughout the US get an additional, say, $1,200 in the mail or whatever that amount is, maybe it's a monthly stipend, I think that we can anticipate that some of that consumer spending will spill over to e-commerce and in particular Amazon. So I think that's a good thing. What I think is going to be challenging is related to the vaccine. And again, this is speculation, but I think if Trump was reelected and they found a vaccine and they deployed the vaccine, I think a lot of his supporters would take the vaccine. I think given that he lost the election, there's natural suspicion of the other side. And he may even, in tweets and other things, knock down the vaccine that may get rolled out next year. I think there's going to be a distinct population segment within the United States, in addition to the normal anti-vaxxer movement, that is just not going to take the vaccine. What percentage is that? Hard to say, but I would anticipate that 15 to 20% of people in the US may not even take the vaccine. So does that draw out the effect? Does that make coronavirus linger longer in our society? Is it harder for us to recover? I don't know, but I think that there's definitely a distinct possibility that that happens. Now that ties into a related point, which is what's going to happen with the economy. I think if you look at what's happening with the national debt, with which we pay a 12% interest rate on, it's blowing up. So there's, if the taxation plan gets implemented, they'll be able to chip away at that a little bit. There's probably going to be some rollbacks to military spending and or entitlements. They may need to look at inflation. Do they let inflation ride to reduce the debt? But there's absolutely going to be something on the debt of the United States that needs to be addressed. But I think we're going to need to take our figurative and literal medicine. We've seen some negative impacts over the last year with COVID. We were riding high for a really long time. I would not be surprised in the least if the impacts of all of these closing businesses, if the impacts of all these systemic unemployment situations rear themselves in the face of a potential recession. Obviously, that's not going to be good for Amazon sellers or the economy at large, but I'm hopeful that the fact that e-commerce is growing, Amazon is growing, that growth and launching additional products will help subside what could be reduced consumer spending if a recession comes. The final question I would say is what's going to happen with a lot of these tech monopolies, of which Amazon has been tucked into that. Do they need to break Amazon apart? I think that with Joe Biden coming in, that's less likely than it would have been under the Trump administration. If anything, I think they may break apart AWS, the cloud computing arm from Amazon. They may go after them for some of how Amazon sells their own products on the platform. Might be a couple things there, but I don't anticipate there will be a massive antitrust initiative that will target Amazon. I do think that there may be something with Facebook, Twitter, and Google YouTube that may come out. I just think there's been a lot going on there in the press. There's been a lot with freedom of speech. I think there will be some additional regulations on some of the big tech conglomerates, but I do think that Amazon will be spared. So guys, that is it. That's my take on Joe Biden being the president in 2021 and beyond. A handful of things, especially related to tariffs and taxation, I think will have the biggest impact on us as Amazon sellers. But frankly, you control your own destiny. We control our own destiny. Part of why we're entrepreneurs is that we don't need a government or anybody else to influence how we live our lives, how we find success, and how we deliver value with our Amazon businesses. Hope this was helpful, guys. We'll continue to monitor the situation, particularly as it relates to tariffs. And as I see and learn more through my attorneys and through my freight forwarders and keeping a pulse on what's happening, you will be the first to know. Thanks for being here, guys. If this is your first time here, hit the subscribe button. We do this every week. And starting next week, I will get back to Mental Game Monday. But I thought that this was so important, I wanted to roll this video out today. Cheers, guys. I hope you have a wonderful week. We will see you next week. Ciao.